pals, I'm here today to wrap up 4 epic fantasy books I read quite recently. So in January I made a video about 12 epic fantasy books I wanted to try and read this year. I will link it up here. And I've actually read 4 of them already. I think all 12 books at the start of a series, which I didn't realise when I made the video, which is quite funny. And I just read one and immediately felt like I wanted to carry on reading epic fantasy. And I still feel like that now, so I'm hoping I get through the rest of them quite early on in the year and then can maybe make another list, but we shall see. So for now I'm going to talk about these 4 and I'm going to talk about them in order of my least favourite to my most favourite. And then what I'm hoping to do once I've read all 12 is to come back and do a video where I rank all 12 from least favourite to most favourite. And the first one, my least favourite, is a very well-known series, and that is Jade by Fonda, and this is the first book in an epic fantasy trilogy that has been fully released and everyone is raving about it. So the premise of this book, very briefly, is that we are on an island nation that is reminiscent of like Taiwan, although the author says it's not based on any one place, but it sort of feels like it's that area of the world. And we are following one family who are a sort of leading gang on that island, and they are warring with another gang on the island. And all of these gangs have the ability to harness the power of Jade. So they wear Jade on their body in jewellery, but also some of them have it sort of like embedded into them. And they can basically be like superheroes. They have super strength and super speed. They can redirect bullets and all things like that. And so they have to train to be able to harness their Jade. And when the book opens, we are following 3 siblings from the sort of leading gang on this island, as they are all relatively new to sort of coming into their roles, and as this opposing gang kicks off this massive war that they weren't expecting, and they're having to sort of handle as all this violence unfolds on the streets. And we're following the sort of leader of the gang, which is the oldest brother, his younger brother, who is the sort of head of their soldiers, I guess, and then his sister, who has been away for many years, has decided to come back to stay with them for a while and sort of gets tangled up in it. So sort of initially, a couple of things are worth saying that are not a critique of the book, but are just sort of my personal preference, and this is something I'll talk about a lot as we go through reviewing all of these books, because so much of what I like or don't like about a book isn't always going to be down to the author, but down to personal preference. So one thing is that like people describe this as like epic urban fantasy, and I'm not quite sure what the definition of urban fantasy is, because I like fantasies that are set in cities, and in fact some of the other, or at least one of the other books I'm going to talk about is set in a city, and I think lots of books I've enjoyed that have been set in cities. What I don't like about this book, and I think this is sometimes what makes it fall into the urban fantasy category, is that there are things like guns, telephones and cars. So I don't like when fantasy feels quite modern, and I guess this would be set in like 1950s equivalent of our world, and yeah, I just like fantasy that feels like it's from much earlier. I read fantasy predominantly for an escape and for the compulsion to be in a world that is not our world, and this is just one step closer to our world because of the inclusion of those more modern technologies. So that's one factor. And that's something I knew going in, and I was still intrigued because lots of people have been raving about it. And another factor is, even though I absolutely adore The Sopranos, which if you don't know is a TV series that came out like 20 years ago about a mafia family in New Jersey, I absolutely love that, but as a rule I'm not that interested in stories about gangs and like mobs and stuff. I think that's because there is a really male-dominated culture, and there's a lot of things about it that really frustrate me in terms of patriarchy and the way they treat women and stuff, so that's something I'm not that interested in, and I feel like The Sopranos sort of surpasses that because it's so excellent in every regard, but it's hard for most things to surpass that, and I didn't feel like Jade really did. It's a very male-dominated world. We do have the sister who's an interesting character, and there is another woman who comes in a bit later into the story, and she feels like she's going to be quite interesting. And I have heard a lot of people say, as you get further into the series, the female characters become more important and all that. But yeah, what I'm looking for when I pick up fantasy is to not open a book that's published recently but is still dominated by men, because it's just like, we've had this for the last however many years in fantasy, and it's just a bit disappointing. So yeah, those sort of two things, the sort of modern technology and the focus on like male-dominated gang violence, are things I'm not particularly interested in. The issue I actually have with this book that I would lay at the author's feet, and is the biggest reason why I don't feel like I want to continue, is the writing style. I think the writing is at its best basic and at its worst poor. So it's very cliched. I found lots of chapters ended on a really lame like cliffhanger. There is a character who gets point of view chapters who is like the baddie. He's like a young guy, and I thought all of his chapters were super tropey, and the things he thought were like really dark emo thoughts. I just felt like he wasn't fleshed out at all. I don't like his storyline and where that's going. There's a sex scene early on in the book in which she describes one of the women as having cherry nipples, which just made me cringe, and that whole sex scene was just awfully written. And so there's just lots of sections of the book where I'm reading just thinking, well, this is sort of passable writing, and then sections where I'd be like, that isn't passable, that's just bad. So yeah, for me, I don't really see much drive to carry on with this series, even though I hear lots of people say, oh, it gets better, because the people who are saying that are people who still enjoyed the first book, and I didn't enjoy the first book. So I'd be interested if anyone out there didn't enjoy the first book, still read the next one, and what they thought after that, because that's where I'm at really. The next one is a lot less well known, and that is The Bone Ships by R.J. Barker. R.J. Barker is a British author. I think this is his second trilogy, and this is fully released as well. And I read this one last, but it falls in second place in terms of my enjoyment, which was quite disappointing. So the premise of this, and I had this little chat with Johnny, because I've always felt like I'm someone who doesn't enjoy books set at sea. Just I don't know why, that's just something I sort of assumed about myself. And actually I started reading this first book and realised that that's completely false. I love the Life Ship Traders series by Robin Hobb, and lots of what I love about it is the elements of it being set at sea. And also I was thinking of quite a few fantasy books that are either set completely at sea or have scenes where they're at sea that I've really enjoyed. And I said to Johnny, I was like, oh, I've realised there's something I really enjoy, and there's sort of three main reasons for that. Can you guess them? And he guessed them all straight away, so we did quite well. Those three reasons are, number one, the contained space. If there's conflict between the characters or sort of a building relationship, those things are sped up and are much more forced, and there's a lot more sort of anticipation as a reader for those moments coming, because they cannot physically get away from one another. So I really enjoy that. The second thing is that you get to see lots of different places. Usually they're stopping at ports and going to various locations, and you get to see, especially if the author's doing a good job, a quite diverse and interesting world with hopefully some different types of people who have different religious beliefs or different cultures. I find that all really, and different geographies and all that. So I find all that really interesting. And I also think that books set at sea, because of the awful weather that can sometimes happen at sea, which can lead to quite scary scenes where you think every single character is going to die, are really atmospheric. So when I'm reading a book set on land, I still find weather like storms and heavy rain and wind atmospheric, but when you make that at sea, the repercussions of that weather are times by like 100. So yeah, so that's just an aside about something I realised about myself as a reader. So this series is set at sea, and it's set in a world where there is no such thing as wood, and so all of their ships are made out of the bones of these immense sort of water dragons that have been extinct for many years. The book opens with a man who works on a black ship, which is where criminals are sent to work, and we sort of find out his story and why he got sent there. And it opens with a woman coming up to him. She's a really famous captain of non-black ships, and she says, I'm going to take over your ship, you're now sort of second captain, and we're doing as I say. And then you sort of follow the crew and how they react to that, and how this relationship develops between our protagonist and this female captain, and you slowly start to find out the mysteries of all these people and what they're heading towards. It's a super complicated world. An issue I had with this book is that, so on the one hand, it's really interesting and really different to anything I've read before. It's very clear the author has all these ideas to the point where it's like, how like Tolkien had all this stuff he knew about his world, and you found out at his speed. It feels a little bit like that. It's clear that R.J. Barker has all the answers, but has decided to tell you them when he thinks it's necessary. Sometimes it just left me feeling a little bit like I was just always on the back, and like was always a bit wrong-footed and wasn't understanding everything. There's lots of like religious beliefs tied to the ocean. There's lots of cultural things that I just felt a bit, I didn't understand. One annoying thing I did find about this book is I kept wishing there was a glossary for some of these terms. There's like quite a lot of hierarchical terms, both on the ship and on land, and I didn't really understand them for a significant portion of the book. And then when I got to the end, I realised there was a glossary, but it was literally opposite the last page, so you'd have had to spoil yourself. So that's silly, like, put these glossaries at the start of the book. I hate it when they put them at the end. So my issues with this book are that amazing world. Yes, he holds things back a little bit, but the world in and of itself is amazing. R.J. Barker can write. This is the closest I've ever read to Robin Hobb's writing, and within a few pages I was like, this feels very similar to that sort of old style fantasy. Johnny said when he tried to read Robin Hobb, it's just a bit oldie worldy, like some of the words feel a bit unfamiliar, and R.J. Barker certainly does that as well, which I like. My massive issue with this is that I think it's just under 400 pages, maybe around that length, and I just felt like it needed a lot more time to get us to warm to the characters. We don't get much opportunity to warm to these people or to really care about them, and so some people said this was really slow, some people said it was really fast. I'd say it's probably somewhere in the middle. But what I would say is I think you could do with another 100 pages of just easing you into actually giving a damn about these people, because you don't really. And this is a commentary I saw lots of people say in their reviews, that like you just get going with the narrative and you don't really have time to form relationships with these people. And I think it's quite fast-paced. It's not fast-paced in that crazy stuff is always happening, but it's fast-paced in that you don't get scenes where our protagonist is like in his room thinking about things, or you don't get many scenes of long dialogue that isn't just about the things they need to do to keep the ship moving. So a lot of the dialogue is just about, we need to get to here, how long will it take, you need to do this job, you need to do this job. And yeah, I just felt like there could be some slower scenes where dialogue was allowed about things that weren't just the ship and the adventure, that would allow us to care more about all of these characters. So in the end, this was a 3-star read, which I felt so disappointed by, because I went in with such high hopes when I, started reading it and liked the writing style. But yeah, I just feel like he failed at making me care. But I'm definitely going to carry on, because I feel like maybe that's what the second book, I don't know, I hope that's what's going to happen in the second book. We'll see. Okay, so the next book is The Ember Blade by Chris Wooding. This is by far the biggest of these 4 books. This is just over 800 pages with fairly small font. And I borrowed all of these books from the library, but this one I actually read in, I think, 4 days when I had COVID. And so I read a lot of pages each day. And especially for me, the first half, I felt super compelled to keep reading. So what is this book about? And I'm going to have to be quite vague here, because when a book is so long, there's things that happen on page 300 which are quite important to the plot, but like a bit spoilery if I tell you them, because they happen on page 300. So this is a classic epic fantasy, and it feels quite reminiscent of something like Lord of the Rings by J.R. Tolkien, okay? We have these young boys who go on this adventure. There are lots of companions. It has the feel of like the band gets together, which I loved. There are animal companions, which I loved. There is this sort of all-consuming evil that they are trying to defeat, and there is a quest. So it ticks all these boxes of like the chosen one. It does that quite interestingly, but when you read it, it reads in that style. There's nothing super special about the writing style in this. It serves its purpose, but it's certainly stronger than the writing in Jade City for me, for my tastes. And yeah, this just felt very classical and epic, and sort of ticked a lot of boxes of what you expect in fantasy. The premise of this is it opens and there are 2 boys who are friends. They're about 15, I think. One of them is from a wealthy merchant family, and one of them is from a sort of more working class family. They are both part of the race of people who have been colonised. So they live in a colonised land, and they are ruled by these people who have invaded and taken over. Both the boys are very different in that the boy from the more wealthy family, his father acquiesced to the colonisers and believes in their way of life, so the son has been raised to admire these colonisers, and the other boy from the working class family, his parents abhor the colonisers, and he thinks that all the stories they're told about how wonderful they are is rubbish, and so he doesn't believe in this sort of racism that the other boy has bought into, which is quite an interesting narrative to read from the perspective of the colonised people. Shit happened, which leads to them being imprisoned, and then, I won't say how, but you know, a quest narrative happens. The book is called The Ember Blade. The Ember Blade is this blade that was last held by their people, their royal family, before the colonisers invaded, and there is a sort of belief that if that blade is found and put back in the right hands of like the chosen one, then they will be able to rise up against their colonisers. And what I like, so the first half of this book, really enjoyed. It is long, it is slow, but I really enjoyed it. The scene setting is very good. I can picture all these locations. I loved when you get to meet all the band of people. I was like just like over the moon with how epic in scope it felt. And then there's something I should like about this book, I think, and I should admire, but I found a bit, I don't know if I did like it, in that this book is very much questioning the narrative of the chosen one and questioning the narrative of this epic quest. Is it worth doing, and who does it help and who does it hurt? And when these epic quests are undertaken, are they done just so that the person doing them, the person or peoples doing them, can feel justified in their decisions, or is it actually done for the greater good of their culture? So all those questions are really interesting, but it meant that some of the characters were a bit unlikable, and I would say that actually, in large part, the central cast are quite unlikable. There is one woman who is like a druidess who has a dog, who I really liked, and I liked them both throughout. But yeah, like the two young boys, especially the main protagonist, is quite annoying, and this sort of a character who comes into the story later on is quite unlikable, and they're clearly supposed to be, but when you're reading a book for over 800 pages, I don't know, like in a way I sort of want to believe in the characters and in the quest, because if not, you know, I guess these philosophical questions are interesting, and they do talk about things that I haven't seen spoken about in fantasy before, but I just didn't find that as enjoyable as the first half before all those questions came up. So yeah, and this book does feel like you could just, like, there's clearly more story to come, but it does also, more than any of the other four, read as a standalone. There is an arc, and you could be like, you know, I'm done, and that's a good wrap up if you don't want to, you know, read this much longer series. So yeah, I'd give this one about 3.5 stars. Initially it felt like, depending on how it went, it could be a 5-star. That's how I was feeling about it. And then yeah, those last few hundred pages I was like, oh, I don't know. So like 3.5 seems a little bit harsh to me, but like, yeah, I didn't love it as much as I was hoping in the first half. And the last one, and by far my favourite of the four, is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. I really enjoyed this one, and like, this could almost have been a 5-star read if it just had like another 100 pages. Let me explain. So the premise of this book is we are set in a world that feels like the pre-Columbia Americas, and we are focused around these tribes who live in this region, and we're following from 3 perspectives. One is a young man called Serapio, who we find out that when he was very young, I think around 10, his mother sort of performed this religious ceremony on him, which blinded him and also put him through like an immense amount of pain, and then she sacrificed herself. And he's always known that that is because his mother has this big plan for him to bring his clan, which is the Crow clan, back to glory. And so Serapio needs to get to the capital city of Tova in time for this religious ceremony, which we would view as an eclipse, but they view as the sun being swallowed whole. And so he comes across this captain, who is one of our other main characters, who is paid to transport him as cargo to the capital. So their stories come together very quickly, and I really enjoyed, they were definitely my favourite bits of the novel. Both their narratives are really interesting. I really enjoyed watching their relationship develop. I just loved everything about it. The third narrative is where I have an issue. We follow the Sun Priestess. So in this world, the priests and priestesses govern the world, so it's like ruled by religion basically. She is the Sun Priestess, which is sort of like the highest of the priests and priestesses, and things aren't really going to plan, and we're following her in these weeks leading up to this big religious ceremony as things start to get a bit messy within this sort of big tower they live in the capital. And we know there are 4 clans who live there who are governed by this religious faction. One of those is the Crow clan, but each clan is named after an animal, and these are real animals that are giants. So like the crows are massive and they can be ridden, and they're brilliant. And so the book's sort of leading towards all of these characters coming together on this bigger religious event, and like shit's clearly going to kick off. My issue with this book, which stopped me from giving it 5 stars, is that I'm somebody, as a fantasy reader, who wants all the information. I don't just want to be told this is the magical ability they have and not have it explained. I want to know how it works. I also want to know how all the religious factions work, how the political factions work, the history of these people. I want everything. And so I just don't think she delivers all that. I think as an author she knows it, but for whatever reason, I guess maybe she didn't want her info dump, or she wanted to keep the book a certain length, or maybe it was the editors, I don't know. I just felt like within that narrative at the capital, you do get an idea of some of the history and what's happened, but for me, just not enough. Like, I felt like I was scrambling to sort of pull little snippets of information and sort of give them more detail myself that wasn't really there. And I just found that a bit frustrating. For me, the book could have just been that bit longer and had more of that. And maybe we'll get that more in the later books in the series, which I'll definitely be pre-ordering. The next one comes out next month, which I'm very excited about. But yeah, for me, I would have had this book be longer and just have more detail about all of that information basically. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. Cannot wait to read the next one. Definitely my favourite of the 4. So if I was going to recommend you one out of the 4, I'd definitely recommend Black Sun. It's also just the most diverse and inclusive. There is a recognised non-binary character, and that's something that is sort of known throughout the world. It's not viewed the same as our world, where like it's recognised that these people are among us, and it's not something you have to like announce about yourself. So I admired that. I liked that we had people of different genders in roles that you wouldn't necessarily see in our world, and I just really liked all the different people and the animals, and yeah, I think she very quickly gets you to like the characters she wants you to like and to dislike the characters she wants you to dislike, which is something I didn't think was as well done in the Bone Ships. Roanhorse is clearly very good at that, and it really worked for me in this book. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the 4 books. I'd love to know if you've read any of these and what your thoughts were down below, and also feel free to recommend me more epic fantasy books based on my thoughts on these ones. Thanks for watching, I'll see you in the next video. Bye!